Good evening. My name is David Lee, and I'm the Director of Education for the Dallas Historical Society. Founded in 1922, we collect, preserve, and exhibit the heritage of Dallas and Texas to educate and inspire present and future generations. For more information about the Dallas Historical Society and upcoming programs, please visit our website, dallashistory.org. As a reminder, if you're an educator and would like to receive continuing professional education credits, please make sure you sign in at the lobby and pick up your certificate at the conclusion of the program. Welcome to an evening with Dr. Erika Arredondo-Haskins. An 11th generation Texan, she earned her Ph.D. in education at the University of the Incarnate Word, where she also teaches undergraduate courses in religious studies, with academic qualifications including a bachelor's degree in business, a master's degree in religious studies, and a master's degree in organizational leadership. Dr. Haskins' expertise spans various disciplines. Her research background includes women's and girls' leadership and leadership in early Spanish Texas history. She served as principal investigator and curator on the travel exhibition Las Damas de Tejas, Notable Women in Texas, and as a historical consultant on numerous projects, including the History Channel's Avenging the Alamo, The Road to Texas Rising. She proudly serves as curator and chair of the Women's Issue Committee for the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution, San Antonio de Bejar chapter. She also directs the University of the Incarnate Word Young Women's Global Leadership Program, where she mentors high school girls in 4 countries. Please join me in welcoming her to the Dallas Historical Society.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Good evening. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you tonight. Dallas has been so kind to me and welcoming since I presented here last year. Thank you for inviting me back. And also, it's Women's History Month, so we have every reason to celebrate, not every day. I mean, not just monthly, but every day, of course. So before I begin, I would like to clarify some items regarding my research. And to be clear, I use no special formula to select the women that I have presented on. These in particular, of course, are all DAR patriots, so I've grouped them together and presenting on them. But after noticing considerable differences between the writings on women in pre-1836 and in our textbooks and scholarly articles versus those in women in post-1836 Texas, I thought that it was time for a change. And the stories of early Spanish Texas women have been left out of the history books, journals, schools, and museums. My study on women in early Spanish Texas aims to present portraits of the women whose stories have been overlooked, examine the lives of women who have been invisible in history, and bring these resilient women to the forefront. I first began studying them when I met my mentor and colleague, and now very good friend, Dr. Amy Porter, when I worked as the executive director for the Hispanic Heritage Center of Texas in downtown San Antonio. Dr. Porter is a history professor at Texas A&M University in San Antonio, and among numerous publications, authored the award-winning book, Their Lives, Their Wills, Women in the Borderlands, 1750 to 1846. Together, Dr. Porter and I brought to life women of some untold stories in early Spanish Texas. And these women did not invent anything, nor did they disguise themselves as a man to fight on the battlefield. They didn't do anything super extraordinary, but they were extraordinary in their own unique ways. They are recognized and honored not only for their contributions to the American Revolution, these women today, but to the development and sustainability of early Spanish Texas. Without their courage and perseverance, the generations that came after them would not be as prosperous or successful as they were, including being able to educate them and raise more strong women and follow in their footsteps, even until today. So taking the wills, the census rolls, and other legal documents and coupling that with the understanding of the world in which these women lived, we have been able to piece together their lives. Some stories are indeed novellas, some are adventurous, and some are quite dangerous, but mostly they all live like most women do, where priority and care are placed on others rather than on their own individual needs. The rancheras in this presentation, or the Tejanas, presented here today, are certainly extraordinary. Spanish rule in Texas brought with it Spanish property laws that persisted through the Mexican period and to some degree into the Republic and American periods. Women could and did own property during their marriages, and the women could administer their property, sign contracts, and write their own wills. Well, the men wrote the wills, but they dictated what was to be said, to be clear. Spanish Texas also had community property laws that meant that everything that a couple earned in their marriage was owned by both spouses equally. Aside from owning property, women often helped their husbands with businesses such as ranching, operating a store, or other endeavors. Another important factor in women's lives on the Spanish-Texas frontier was the high probability that they would be widows. Widowhood rates were high and life expectancy was low. As a result, many women found themselves independent at some point in their lives. As widows, some women continued to control their property and operate family businesses. The frontier of Spanish Texas could be difficult, a difficult place, but not only to survive, but to make a living due to Spanish laws and customs. And women had an actual chance at success, and they did. Before I begin, I'm going to give you a brief background. Is that working? Where? I practiced earlier and it was working, I promise. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Oops. Okay, before I begin, I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief overview of the founding of San Antonio to just kind of set the stage. And it's very brief. I promise I won't get into anything real complex. But the entrada started about the year 1600s. And by 1718, because the French were encroaching in on Spanish Texas, the king said, you know, we really got to populate this place. And he sent a group of 72 people from Mexico, from the mission San Juan Bautista, which was right at the border of Texas and Mexico. And they came up and settled in and founded what is San Antonio in May of 1718. This group of people consisted of the Franciscans, the soldiers. Some of the soldiers brought their wives and their children, so families came with them, and some Native Americans, and their servants and slaves. And they founded what is now Mission San Antonio de Valero, known as also the Alamo. So this group of people lived in San Antonio. I forget I'm in Dallas, and if I say here, I mean San Antonio, because I'm from San Antonio. But they settled, you know, in 1718. They cultivated their crops, they built their homes, and they started to, you know, live their lives. And then the French were still giving us some trouble, so the king said, okay, we really got to get more people over here, and they requested families from the Canary Islands to come and settle in about 1730. So of the over 300 people that he thought he was going to have come to San Antonio, only 56 people actually came, which consisted of 16 families. So in 1731, we have the arrival of the Canary Islanders. If you're not familiar with the Canary Islands, these are the islands here in the Canaries. They're right here. They're off the coast of Africa. and they boarded a ship. The whole journey took over a year to get to San Antonio. This was when they landed in Mexico, in Veracruz, from the Canary Islands. They would land here in the port, and they walked and stopped all the way up. It took a year to get to San Antonio. These are the actual stops of where they stopped at. Okay, so the Canary Islanders it was a request by the king himself. So they were ordered to begin the very first official settlement of San Antonio, the very first official government of San Antonio, of Texas. And they named their town Villa de San Fernando. The first alcalde, or mayor, was a man named Juan Leal. And I mention him here because he's going to be mentioned in one of the women's stories in a little bit. But an alcalde, yes, in English it means mayor, but they did not, they weren't in the role as what you see a mayor is today. They were more of a judge. They acted as judges. And so you're going to see that as well. It's important to make that differentiation because in the wills, they do call themselves mayors or alcaldes, but they were the actual judges that would rule on some of these petitions and property rights that go on. And then they received land. The king gave them land grants in downtown San Antonio. So if you're familiar where the San Fernando Cathedral is in Main Plaza, all around there, they were given different lots. And then they were given actual money, and they were given the title of Hidalgo, which is a lower class of a royalty in Spain. And then, remember, the families that I told you about that came in, the 72 people, they were already here, and they were already living here, and they had already cultivated the crops. Well, because the Canary Islanders deemed themselves as superiority, than them, because they were a mixed class of Native Americans and soldiers, and the Canary Islanders were full-blood Spanish people, they were not allowed to intermarry, and they were not allowed to mingle with the other settlers. And not only that, the Canary Islanders, they were kicked off their lands, that the 1718 settlers had been there already, and so the Canary Islanders actually took their lands that had already been developed. So there was a lot of controversy, and we see a lot of lawsuits go on around this time period with each other. They built the first church. So I mention this because you're familiar with San Fernando Cathedral downtown. That was their first church. It took a long time for them to build because everybody had to come together, no matter what your class was, no matter what your ethnicity, everybody came together to help build this church. Prior to building the church, they would have to go to Mission San Antonio de Valero or the Alamo, which they had built their own chapel, but it wasn't even fully built yet. So it was important for them to build this parish church. Okay, so that's a little bit of background on where we're headed. So generally, when Americans think of the American Revolution, or when you think of the 4th of July, right, around the world, we think of George Washington, we think of apple pies, we think of the Founding Fathers, or maybe the 13 colonies, but it's very rare that anybody will connect Texas to the American Revolution. So it's okay if you didn't know today, before this, that Spanish Texas was very involved in the contributions to winning the American Revolution. We're still learning a lot about this. The research is still coming to the surface. We're still finding archives of people that were involved. We're still searching for things, some of the languages that some of the words you're going to hear, donativos, and inheritance in the wills of these women, finding out who owned these actual ranches that contributed to it. So it's still an ongoing process. So this is just a little bit of what we know so far. In the last 40 years, we've brought to the surface that the Texas contributed to the American Revolution, thanks to a man named Robert Donoff. He was a historian and a retired judge, and he's the one that actually discovered the documents in the census, the presidial rolls. And in fact, he talks about assigning of all the soldiers exactly on the 4th of July, 1776. And there's so many things going on in San Antonio that you would be amazed to see all the documentation that we have on that exact day, that our founding fathers were also signing the the American Declaration of Independence. Spanish rule in Texas brought with, After Spain declared war on Britain, as an ally of France, Spanish forces under the leadership of Spanish Governor Bernardo de Galvez attacked British positions in the south and captured West Florida during battles along the Gulf Coast, ending the siege of Pensacola. Pensacola's battle lasted for 2 months, ending in May 8, 1781, making it the longest-lasting siege of the American Revolution. This secured the southern route for supplies and closed off the possibility of any British offensive through the western frontier in the United States on the Mississippi River. Spain also supported American forces with money, food supplies, uniforms, blankets, medicines, weapons, and ammunition. In 1780, Carlos III, the King of Spain, issued a royal decree that all subjects in New Spain voluntarily contribute or donativo of 1 or 2 pesos to help fund the American Revolution. In 1781, the Spanish crown financed the Battle of Yorktown with gold and silver coins collected in Havana, alleviating the financial difficulties faced by General George Washington and the Continental Army. Spain also financed French land and naval forces critical to the American war effort and ultimately the victory at Yorktown. So this is a document of a gentleman by the last name Garcia, who actually wrote to the Spanish Texas individuals to contribute to the revolution. And he says, because dispatching this livestock to the aforementioned governor is expedient to the service of the king, I dispose that your lordship proceed immediately to its purchase and roundup, taking care that the number of beasts includes sufficient bulls so that the stock may procreate in that region. So what's happening here is they're requesting, upon inspection of Spanish Texas, they realized that, well, we had longhorn cattle, and it had been here since the 1600s, so we had a lot of it. And this was some good beef. So they needed, at the time, were on short of food supplies, so they requested that the cattle begin to be sent to, if they couldn't afford monetarily, for at least to send the cattle to Louisiana to feed the Spanish troops. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit of the women here. What you're going to see here are 4 of the women, Spanish women patriots who are officially recognized as Spanish patriots by the Daughters of the American Revolution. These women have contributed, they owned the ranches, they contributed cattle to the American independence. And I love this quote from Dr. Chipman and in his book on Spanish Texas, and it said, women played indispensable roles as settlers, wives of colonists, mothers of successive generations of defenders, and vital members of the new Hispanic communities. Okay, so a little bit of what women's rights and lives were like during this time. So we're in the time period of the mid-1700s. Women were granted special rights. They had property rights, they owned lands, they were They inherited the lands through their fathers. So the father was actually able to give their daughters these lands. And it's, in Dr. Porter's, I mentioned her, on her dissertation was actually looking at some hundreds of wills in New Mexico and northern Mexico and Texas. And some of these wills were just so fascinating, the stipulations in there. One father, for example, left a good amount of money for his daughters as long as they remained single and used it to start their own business. So that's how specific they would get in their wills at this time. And so concerned about, that their daughters prospered on their own. They were encouraged, yes, to marry and bear children, and they were, like today, expected to run the household, and still, if you wanted to run a business or do something else, then you could. Obviously, there wasn't, in San Antonio, in the Texas area, we didn't have schools at the time, even though over the years, some tried to start it, even in early San Antonio. But the women generally were not educated. And if you did become a widow, you were expected to stay single for a while. So before you couldn't just jump into another marriage, even though you probably wanted to because life was hard, so they needed that support. And we're going to see this with several of the women that we look at. And then they intermarried and made sure there was a lot of arranged marriages. We see that she's not in this presentation, but in what I call or deem the very first Hispanic First Lady of Texas, Maria Perez Casiano. She married a Spanish governor. She was only 22 years old. He was 61 years old, but her father was a prestigious military, officer, and that alliance was very helpful. So more than likely it was an arranged marriage. I don't think she probably was in love with him, but a possibility. But and then concerning the Canary Islanders, of course, if you married a Canary Islander, remember I told you they were given the land grant, they were given the money, they were given everything to them, so they immediately came in with this status. So marrying an Isleño was, kind of a good thing. You elevated your status if you married an Isleño. And then with the Castilian laws in place, the women had the upper hand of being prosperous. The wills, lawsuits, the state settlements, the petitions, and all that, we know that they had access to that. We know that they were able to voice their opinion. If they wanted to fight something, they knew they could go in front of the judge and voice whatever concerns that they had. And then the important thing was that women taught women. They did not pit against each other because they had to protect each other. That's all they had. They weren't able to be involved in any political decisions. They weren't able to really hold a job or anything like that. They may have run some family stores and they had business transactions, but they knew that passing on their own knowledge without having an education was very important to them. And so here, I thought I'd put this map to just kind of demonstrate, as the women were handed, whether they became a widow and they inherited a part of, or they were willed part of their husband's holdings, or their father left them land, they knew that they had land, they had wealth. And they became prosperous. Some of these women, which the women we're going to talk about today, obviously their ranches grew and they were able to prosper. So I thought it would be good to see, kind of see where we're at. Obviously here's the 13 colonies, and so here we are in Texas. When they had the ranches, here's San Antonio, you see Bejar is right here, and they would do the cattle drives at the request of the king when he asked for the cattle. They would send the cattle drives up to Nacogdoches and then all the way to Louisiana over here. Okay, so before we get into their each of their biographies. I just thought I would go over. As you heard, I am a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. So the discovery of the women, and their recognition as Spanish patriots is very important to me. And we do have a Spanish task force through the Daughters of the American Revolution. If you know anybody or anybody that's interested, they have their own place. They'll do the research for you. They'll help you do your genealogy and put things into place. But then a lot of people ask, well, how do you know? How do you know if your great-grandmothers or somebody was involved and will be qualified? So I just kind of gave an overview, and you can always, of course, research this on your own. But for Texas, specifically, it was donating the cattle. And we have lists of the cattle ranches. Donoff is actually the one that published the list in his book. But we have a list of who owned these ranches that contributed to the American Revolution. We do not have exact names. So when I see a list, it's going to say the name of the ranch. But if you look at the will of the woman at that same time period, she mentions that ranch, that she owns that ranch in her will. So then we just piece it together. That's how we are able to qualify the women as a Spanish patriot. And then they also now accept Spanish patriots from Cuba, from the Canary Islands, from Louisiana, any of the areas that may have contributed during this time period. And here's Donoff's book, if anybody's interested in grabbing that. It's very thin, but very informative. He has some great work in there. And in order for you to qualify for as a Spanish patriot, or for the individual to qualify, you had to have contributed and been alive during this time period, through 1779, exactly, not May 3rd, because they will disqualify you, not May 5th, or any time after that, they will disqualify you. It has to be exactly between these time periods, which was the official call and end by the king. Okay. So we're going to now get into the lives of the women. Maria Robana Bentoncourt, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on her than I would normally on any of the other three that I'm going to present on, because she was the social leader of the Villa of San Fernando de Bejar. Maria Bentoncourt was from Lanzarote, the Canary Islands, and this is the actual quote, and I'm going to read it, that was given in Veracruz when they first landed in Mexico. They took a list and they described every single individual to the T, and that's how we know how each person looked like. In the early 18th century, as I noted, the King of Spain requested families from the Canary Islands to settle in San Antonio de Bejar. Of the 16 families that traveled by ship to Mexico, Maria Robana and Juan Rodriguez Granado were the 14th family. So there were 16 families, as I noted, so each family is known by their number. So a descendant will tell you, oh, I'm a Canary Islander, but I'm from the 10th family. I'm a Canary Islander, but I'm from the 9th family. So she's from the 14th family. Juan, only 27 years old, became ill and passed away upon landing in Veracruz. Maria was pregnant. She was with child. She delivered her youngest son not long after the loss of her husband. And just after arriving in Texas, the beautiful 27-year-old lost yet another child. Their first destination was a stop in the village of Cultican. It is here that the list of the settlers was produced, as I noted. According to the November 8, 1730 list, Maria was described as a native of Lanzarote, about 27 years old, good figure, slender, long face, fair complexion, black hair and eyebrows, and thin nose. It is also in this village that Maria bore her son, Juan de Acuña, named after the viceroy, She traveled to San Antonio with many of her fine furnishings and heirlooms. She was very wealthy in the Canary Islands, but she decided to journey to San Antonio just to start a new life. And then at the time, also in the Canary Island, there was a lot of volcanic activity happening, and so they made the decision to come. So now, as head of the 14 family, Maria received a land grant located on the Plaza of Islas, which you know as Main Plaza. And some of her furnishings included a writing desk inlaid with ivory, several ornate trunks trimmed in silver, and her dining room was adorned with fine china decorated in gold, accompanied with fine silver. Now, when they arrived to San Antonio, they arrived and saw jacales. A jacale is a hut, straw, right? And so I'm sure that they were not happy when they saw they were coming. They knew they were coming to Frontierland. I don't think they probably knew how desert it was. It was not what they were used to already in a developed place like the Canary Islands or Lanzarote. So she had money, as we noted, and she did bring her items with her from the Canary Islands, traveled the entire way up with all of these furnishings and beautiful jewelry, and she eventually built the finest home in downtown San Antonio. Maria dressed in the finest clothing as well. She owned beautiful pearl necklaces, bracelets, and jewelry made of emeralds that she handed down to her daughters and granddaughters. Maria was indeed the leader of the village. Not only was she the wealthier, but she was a strong leader, and she used her voice as needed. So in a 1980 publication, remember she's a widow, so she's not allowed to remarry soon after. But the bachelors that are available are really seeking her hand. So there's a story about her in this book, and it's called Iguana's Successors, The Story of the Canary Islanders' Immigration into Texas in the 18th Century by Samuel Buck. And it was an interesting story about her and being wooed by the alcalde, Juan Leal, the very first alcalde that I spoke about. He sought relentlessly after Maria, and I quote, because she possessed a natural grace and charm not found in any of her female associates in the new settlement. Juan Leal, another Isleño and San Antonio's first alcalde, thought if he charmed her, she would become his wife, and he would not only have a young, beautiful wife, but live in the home that she was building, and they would be the most prestigious couple in the colony. But Maria just wasn't interested in him. He tried, and one day he sent, and I quote, a gift from the Viceroy's attendants, a small silver chain to which was attached a silver pendant bearing several deep-etched Aztec characters. He sent it to her home a week later. Maria sent Leal a wicker basket containing a live armadillo, which her children had captured on the outskirts of the town. Around the animal's neck was, you guessed it, the necklace. And she left the pendant swinging between its ugly front legs. She sent no message with the armadillo, but the implication was clearly stated, right? She wasn't interested. And Leal would greatly oblige her if, like an armadillo, he would bury a hole in the ground, enter it, and take the gift with him. The following day, the priest at the chapel at the fort of San Antonio de Béjar performed the ceremony, and she married another Isleño named Martin de Armas. They became man and wife. So I thought that was interesting because it kind of gives you an idea. I think a lot of people have this vision that at that time period, because if you're familiar with the paintings of Theodore Gentile, and his paintings of what San Antonio life would have been like at that time, there's a lot of paintings of the women, on the floor, barefoot, just grinding the maize, or, doing these other homely duties. But they had such an amazing life outside of that we know now are in the wills and other places that we can find. So I like to always talk about those so we can have another vision of what these women were like. So like many early Texas women, Maria owned a vast amount of ranch land. Oh, there's her. I'm sorry, okay. I need to explain these, I'm sorry. So this is Juan, her husband, who died in Veracruz. He died of cholera upon arriving in Mexico. And then here is main plaza, and there's the Granado home where it was actually built. So like many early Texas women, Maria owned a large amount of ranch land. She owned Rancho de Palo Quemado, Rancho de San Lorenzo de los Mulas, and San Antonio de Cibolo. Those were three of the largest ranches that she owned. Maria and other Tejanas provided cattle to Spanish troops in Louisiana during the American Revolution, and she is officially recognized as a Spanish patriot. She died in 1779. She lived a long life. She lived up into close to her 80s, and she's buried in the Church of San Fernando Cathedral. This Virgen here is still in San Fernando Cathedral. The story is told. I do not have any documentation of this, but the Canary Islanders tell the story that they carried the Virgen the entire way up from the Canary Islands. They had her on an altar, and they brought her and placed her in the church. They do honor Our Lady of Guadalupe as their official patroness, but the Virgen Candelaria is the patroness of the Canary Islanders. I was asked, is this the original one? No, this is a replica because the first one was damaged or lost, and the president of the Canary Islands actually replaced it and continues to bring new clothing to her every 3 years to this day. Here is her will. I just wanted you to see the original writing of what we see when we get into the archives. Of course, these have been transcribed and translated. This is in Spanish, and it has been transcribed in both English and Spanish in the Spanish archives, the Bexar County Spanish archives. These are her ranches. Donoff has this map in his book that he created of all the ranches in San Antonio and the surrounding areas, and the red circles are the 3 that she owned. And these are the cattle brands. Maria does note in her will that she has a cattle brand, but for all the women that presented here today, we could not find, no archivist has been able to find any cattle brand, even though they note that they do have one. And then her legacy that she left behind, I won't read them all, but I wanted you to see, because of her success, these are some of her children and grandchildren one ran the largest general store, one was the first Hispanic First Lady of Texas. Esther Perez Carvajal is a more modern, she passed away in 1942, and she began the first Spanish program in San Antonio, and actually in Texas and California, and authored many educational books. And she has a school named after her in San Antonio that I wrote about. So I just wanted to show you the legacies that she's left behind. We don't have very much information on the following women just because the documentation is not there. Unlike American women who wrote in journals, who were educated, who left letters behind, we don't have that, unfortunately, for the Spanish Texas women. So all we have to go by are, again, the wills or the petitions. So Antonia de Armas is the next Spanish patriot. She was born in 1741 in the Villa de San Fernando de Bejar. She was the daughter of Maria Robana Bentoncourt that I just presented on, and her second husband, Martin Lorenzo de Armas. Antonia then is the half-sister to Pedro Granados, who was Maria's first-born son. He's the oldest. And he was also a Spanish Royal Army officer. Antonia died sometime before 1791. Her father, Martin, held the title of the ranch named Palo Quemado prior to his marriage to Bentoncourt. So remember, Bentoncourt got it, and then now Antonia's getting a part of that ranch. When he died, he left 50% of it to his wife, and then 25% to the biological children. Before Bentoncourt died in 1779, Antonia bought her brother's share of Palo Quemado, thus making her now 50% owner of the ranch. Bentoncourt owned multiple ranches, and after her death, left the property, as required by Spanish law, divided equally between all her children. At the beginning of the cattle drives, which started in July 1779, Antonia owned portions of the ranchos San Antonio on Cibolo Creek, the Palo Quemado, and San Lorenzo de las Mulas. They were all full functioning cattle ranches. And she's listed on the 1779 census, proving her contribution to the American Revolution. So this petition states that, Pedro was supposed to, he was the executor of the will, so he was supposed to divide the ranch land, and he never did, basically. And so she just got fed up of waiting and not getting her part, and then she has to be prepared to hand that down to her children. So she sues him because she has the right to. She sues her own brother. It was not good. And she actually states in here that she's afraid of what he might do because this is interesting because she brings out Pedro's real character. She says that he would probably beat her if she spoke up. So we know that there was some kind of volatile relationship going on there, right? And so she wins, she gets what was hers, but why did she have to do that in the first place? And imagine if she didn't have the right, she would have had nothing, right, and been left without. So she had the power to do so, and she did. This is where it says, when my brother learned of this, he came to expel me and my sons from this said land, abusing me verbally and threatening to break my ribs with sticks. A very lamentable thing to me. Who considered him capable of doing it, since there was no refuge and since I'm a woman and a widow? And remember, they couldn't write, but they could express. So these are her actual words on how she felt. Okay, the next patriot is Leonor Delgado. She was born in Lanzarote in the Canary Islands of Spain at the age of 3. She journeyed to Texas with her family, and after arriving in Veracruz in 1730, Leonor's father also passed away. His name was Luis Delgado, and he died of fever, leaving her mother a widow. Leonor married Juan Jose Flores, and in 1750, he died. He died in 1770. She married him in 1750, and then he died in 1779, but he was credited for creating the very first cattle brand in Texas. Following his death, Leonor owned and operated the Rancho San Jose de Alamos. Her longhorn cattle were a major contribution to the American Revolution. This is a monument that went up about 4 years ago, maybe. If you're ever in San Antonio, I highly recommend and encourage you to go see it. It's beautiful. If you've ever been to the Tejano Monument at the Capitol, it is of the same artist, and the Canary Islanders raised the funding to have this. It was millions of dollars to have this in place and in memory of the Isleños in Main Plaza in the San Antonio area. It's right between the courthouse and the San Fernando Cathedral. Our next Spanish patriot is Maria Ana Curbelo. This painting here was just unveiled about 2 weeks ago. It was just rendered by a forensic artist. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But let me tell you a little bit about her. She's very interesting as well. Maria was born in 1712 in the Lanzarote, Canary Islands. Maria was described as an 18-year-old, medium height, broad-shouldered, fair complexion, long face, light gray eyes, chestnut hair, and eyebrows and thin nose. And she married an Isleño named Vicente Travesio in 1730 when they got to Mexico. When they arrived in Mexico, he was one of the bachelors, and they got married, and then they had 12 children. Both Maria Ana and her husband were part of the original families and were instrumental in the development and sustainability of the first civil settlement. He was elected Azulca mayor, which was the chief constable for life. He and his eldest son, Thomas, owned the ranch named Las Mulas. With Vincent's death in 1779, the ranch was left to his wife and children in his will. She died in 1785 and in San Antonio at the age of 73 years old. She's recognized as a Spanish patriot of the Daughters of the American Revolution because she donated cattle to help feed the troops in the Spanish, under Galvez's military soldiers. And she died in 1785 in San Antonio. This artist, Lois Gibson, is a forensic artist who is actually in the Book of World Records for creating capturing the most criminals in the forensic artistry in Houston. She worked for the Houston Police Department. She's been on Oprah. She has done numerous interviews. Good Morning America, you have it. If you just look up her name, Lois Gibson, she's all over the place. She's amazing. I started a project with Lois in 2017 to render photographs of the mayors of San Antonio from 1731 to 1836, because we have a huge list of over 100 men that are on this list, and some of them you can't even Google their names anymore. So some professors and I and scholars have started to put their bios together and get them academically published, and along with that, we created portraits. We found Lois and started this project, and so it's just an ongoing educational project. So Irene, who is the head of the Spanish task force, wanted to have her grandmother rendered. And we turn in generational portraits, the closest that we can, obviously to the individual, but then throughout the generations, and then Lois puts it together. But with the Canary Islanders, look how much easier it is for us to really get a picture of what they would have looked like because of the list that was placed in the archives. So since then, the Alamo has actually hired Lois to create every single Alamo defender, woman and child that was in the Alamo. And so they're recreating what they would have looked like. I saw her the other day, and she actually told me Pearl Harbor, I guess the association has reached out to her, and they want to hire her to now start creating the men that they could no longer have the photographs. And they want to bring them back to life and put them in the museums. Okay, so Maria Ana did not stay quiet either. When wrong was done to her, they spoke up. They did not sit back and just let anybody trample on them. And these documents show that. I wanted to show the documents because we're fortunate to have her name here, but I'm going to show you another document where there are not any names and there are lawsuits going on. So we actually have to pull the lawsuit, pull the archives. These are not, this is online, this index, but we cannot just pull up the actual documents online. You still have to go into the archives and get your hands dirty. In this document, Mariana sues Vicente Flores, her own son and grandson, because they keep stealing the cattle off her land. Remember, these are vast amounts of land, hundreds and hundreds of cattle, and they weren't branded at the time. Some were branded, some weren't. But anyway, the boys would go and steal the cattle and then go and resell it and make their own little money. And I guess they thought she wouldn't catch on or something, I don't know. They thought they'd get away with it. Well, she turned around and she sued them. And she actually went through with it. Here is another lawsuit, the same, we're charged with cattle theft. But I wanted to show this one because it doesn't name Mariana in here. We just see the men's names in here. So upon discovery that it was Mariana's, it's an 18-page document. Very interesting because they keep there's all this red tape, and then remember, it's the old boys kind of group, and so they would just put off the lawsuits and put off the lawsuits and put off the lawsuits. Well, eventually she dies, and she never got to see, it never went through. She never got to see the outcome of whatever happened. And then here's her will. Again, I just wanted to show you what, this, yes, is transcribed, but prior to transcription, people would actually have to translate it and transcribe it. Very interesting is the 1779 census, which I wanted to show you, but I didn't have time to upload it here. But the census is very interesting because it shows the top 10 ranches in the year 1779. And of those top 10 ranches, 2 are women. Not only 2 are women, but Antonia, remember Antonia and Pedro, half-brother and sister, and they didn't get along. He cheated her from her land. She, by this time, owned more cattle than him. So I thought that was interesting, that the women, were outdoing the men here in some cases. And then these documents are just similar documents on other women ranchers. Maria Cavillo, her ranch was crossed over into the Mission Espada area, one of the largest ranches in San Antonio. And she, again, uses her power to petition the Mexican government for land that was cheated of her, even though, I'm talking vast amounts of land, and they could have easily said, no, they have enough. But no, they wanted to make sure that their voices were heard and that they got what was rightfully theirs. So she petitions, this is just one of the documents, but Maria Cavillo is all over. She's not having it with people trying to cheat her out of her land. And she's not deemed an American, Spanish patriot, but as you could see, that's a later time period, 1828. But I just wanted to show you, because there is a lot out there on her, and hopefully one day somebody will have the courage to write her biography. Here's another woman that also owned a vast amount of land, and it's a very popular ranch. This is her will. This is what it looks like when it is translated and transcribed instead of in the Castilian verbiage. And this will was dated in 1785. She's not deemed a patriot, but the family is trying to find documentation to get certified. The daughters have honored the contributions of these women in many ways, many ways. I'm so proud of how all the hard work that the National Society is doing to honor men and women, Spanish patriots, and their contributions to American independence. This monument was erected in 2009, and it actually has etched in the monument the Spanish patriots, and these women are all on the monument to have been recognized. They have a very beautiful ceremony when they do put new names on the monument. There was one this past weekend. This is located in Austin, Texas at the State Cemetery. So if you're ever over there, I encourage you to go see it. It's very beautiful, and to honor them in such a way, is creating wonderful work of the daughters. They have several programs going on, including America 250, because in 2026, we're going to celebrate our 250th year of America's anniversary. So that, as we speak, we are putting plaques of 250 America all over our country and honoring the patriots. This one in particular was at the Spanish Governor's Palace and in downtown San Antonio, and there's an actual plaque there. If you're ever there again, go and see the plaque that has been placed over there. It's very beautiful. This isn't the plaque, but they do. These are the Spanish patriots, some of the women in the DAR, and there's Maria Ana right there. They're patriot. So, if you have any questions, thank you.